Right, so let's talk about Jira. As you might know, Jira is a project management tool that allows project managers to keep track of the progress of various tasks and the folks that are assigned to those tasks. When you first log into Jira, you're automatically at the system dashboard, which is basically, this is already your organization dashboard, right? That keeps track of all sorts of statistics. The project manager can add all sorts of gadgets here that measure the velocity of a team, how many tasks have been created versus how many have been closed during the sprint. You know, what's your burn rate? How many points are you burning through a particular sprint? And it gives them all sorts of indications of the health of a particular project, right? So a high-level view into that particular project. A lot of these commands that I'm going to show you, you do not have permissions to use them, but I'm going to cover them nevertheless. I don't believe you have access to be able to create your own project. Maybe you do. I don't know. Anybody tried? This is what the system administrator did. You know, he has a script and that generates all these projects for everybody in the class. But if you could create them, you would go from your projects down menu and create a SCRUM software development. There's all different types of project types, but the one we're using is a SCRUM-based software development that is familiar with sprints, is familiar with backlogs, familiar with all the idiosyncrasies of running a SCRUM-type project. Once you create the project, it asks you what kind of workflow do you want to use, and what kind of Scrum board do you want. This is the most common one, the most simpler one. It's the default, although it can be configured on how the issues, different tasks, and different stories flow throughout the sprint. At the beginning of the sprint, folks go in the backlog and find all the tasks and load the sprint, and everything is in the to-do at the beginning of the sprint. As the developers complete a task, they drag it or they click on the they can edit it also from within the ticket, and it gets moved into a different state that you're actually working on it. Right? If you're not working on it, then it should stay in the to-do list in progress while you're actually doing the development. Once you think that this is something that can be delivered, that can be put into production, it's moved over to done. Presumably, in progress also includes test any local unit testing that you might have done, also any testing by some QA engineer. Some organizations like to split this into more granular statuses. So they might have an additional status here where you have like a QA test or some kind of testing status where the developer says, well, I'm done. Right? I'm going to put it in testing because it's somebody else's responsibility. Some QA engineer is going to test it and try to break it. All right? And then if they find something wrong with it, they'll put it back in progress so that you can keep working on it. But when you move from in progress to QA, presumably is because you are confident that this is code that can be put into production. Right? That you're confident that this will never come back to you. Right? That you'll never have to work on this again. Right? Or only because you're going to do some enhancements but not for debugging. So as far as you're concerned, you are done, and whoever's going to test this is going to be very, very happy with what has been delivered. So it should not be put into QA only because you want somebody's feedback. Right? It's that as far as you're concerned, right, you have completed that ticket, and you should never. You've done enough testing, and you've already evaluated. Perhaps you've already given a demo to the QA engineer and the product owner that they're actually happy. This is exactly what they want. So that when you move it to QA or done, right, you are really done. Also, there's several other types of tasks or issue types. One of the ones that we're going to be using is epics. You're asked in the assignment to create 3 epics, 1 per team. So team number 1 will create a user epic, team number 2 will create a services epic, and team number 3 will create a service category epic, right? Which will be an epic is it's a big user story, right? Something that needs to be broken down into multiple user stories that deal with the idiosyncrasies, the details. The admin, the user administrator, right? Epic is going to include, I want to be able to create a new user, delete an existing user, update an existing user, navigate through the list of users, whatever, sort users, X, Y, Z, right? All the stories are going to be associated. Here's a particular type of story that usually a story will be mostly new features, right, that are represented as user stories, saying what the actor is and what is it they want to accomplish. But there are other different types of stories that you're asked to create, such as research stories or design stories, right? That, for instance, to learn JPA, we're asking you to create a research story, right, where we walk you through implementing those 3 or 4 files, right, for researching and learning on how to use JPA. So that's going to be one of the research stories in there. I don't know that. I mean, you can use subtasks. These are generic tasks that are not specifically stories, user stories. Obviously, bug is something wrong. Everybody's responsible for finding bugs and assigning bugs to folks. We'll come back to that when we talk about testing a little later. The name, you would name you give it the name of the project. Once you're done and create a project, and typically this is where you would come as your first screen, it would be the backlog screen. The backlog screen is going to look something like this. It's going to be empty at first because it's the beginning of the project. But as the project evolves over time, the backlog is going to start filling up, right? Anything that you think needs to be done to complete the project would go in the backlog. Right, that has not been committed to yet, right? And typically you might have hundreds of stories listed here that might span months or even years worth of work, right? And every week the product manager, the business analyst, the Scrum master, every week they come and they groom this backlog, identifying what to work on next. Perhaps following some Gantt chart or some PERT CPM or some prioritization of what to work on next, or having met with the stakeholders on having identified certain priorities, and it says, okay, well, these are the set of stories that we're going to be working on next. They would create a sprint, every week or every 2 weeks. They would create a brand new sprint, and then move those tasks, move them onto the sprint. Then during sprint planning, they might ask individual developers, hey, who wants to grab this or that or the other story? And the story might typically maybe only include a title or maybe just a 1-sentence description, right? Very, very vague. But when the developer grabs the story, they're responsible for doing the necessary discussions with the end user, with the product owner on what it is that we're actually building. And put some details into the story. And once they have some of the details, they'll provide a size of how much effort do they think they can do this. Is this a 1-point story, a 2-point story? Can I commit to deliver this in 1 day, in 2 days? How long do I think I'm going to be able to? Do I need? Once we size it, we make sure that the sprint doesn't have more than X number of points. Right, from previous sprints that we've done, perhaps we have found out that we can't really do more than 15 points per sprint. Right, at first, the very first sprint, it'll be very inaccurate. Right, you'll be either way too optimistic or too pessimistic. As you progress through the multiple sprints, you'll become more and more accurate. Right, as you become more confident on your way of being able to estimate the level of complexity. I don't know that a semester is enough. Also because a lot of what we're going to be asking you to do is very convoluted, right? And it's more geared towards the academic, learning through the process. So it's in a real environment, right? These would be real stories. It would be very, very hectic, and things would be. Hopefully would work out in the end, obviously. Anyway, so once you've loaded it, once you know how many points, there will be a link for you to start the sprint, and the clock starts ticking. and it'll ask you how long is a sprint. You'll say a week or 2 weeks, whatever it is, and the clock starts ticking, right? And you start moving stories around. So yeah, so the backlog. So this is the main screen, right, where you can create issues and boards and then navigate to everybody. So we're going to focus on each one of these links. View all projects. I don't believe you can view all projects. I don't know that you have that privilege. I'll say boards. So boards, or Scrum boards, is a set of buckets, right, that allow you to know what the current status of each one of these of the individual issues or tasks, where they are. Are they still in the to-do list? Have we started and they're in progress, or have we moved them into the done phase? And you can create either a Kanban board or a Scrum board. We're going to be using Scrum as opposed to Kanban. A Scrum has a philosophy that we're going to time box things, right? That we're going to take 2-week sprints and we're going to work on this, right? These are the only things that we're going to be working. We're not going to add new things during the sprint. We're not going to take out things during the sprint. We have identified what we need to do during the sprint. And at the end, we're done and whatnot, and things might spill over to the next sprint. Whereas Kanban is more like a flow that, as you're done, new things can come into the flow, right? You don't wait, you don't time box and say, I only have 1 or 2 weeks. It's kind of like an infinite flow of a queue of things that are removed from the queue and things are added to the queue, and just flows continuously. Whereas Scrum says, well, no, let's focus and see what we can do in this amount of time, right? And let's not focus on anything else until we arrive at the end of the Scrum. So 2 different philosophies, but it's the same agile methodology, right? So we're going to create a board from an existing project, or you can also create a filter for the teams, for the team boards. You're going to need to have a filter. You're going to have to create a filter that says, return to me only those issues that pertain to these 3 team members. Because the default Scrum board is going to show everybody's issues, so that you're going to see your issues in your team, plus you're going to see the issues in team 2 and team 3, right? And it's going to be very hard to focus on what you are working on, okay? Which is great. I mean, you could see at the high level what the entire organization is working on, but you'll want to create a couple of Scrum boards that are specific to your team. So filters allow you to do that. It says, well, no, I want to see the issues that are specific to this particular set of folks, right? In team number 1, team number 2, team number 3. So you're responsible for creating those as well, okay? So you have to do it from a filter. And you'll give it a name, team 1 board, team 2 board, or each team has a name. You're welcome to use your team's name. Once you've created the board, you can navigate it from the drop down of the board there. And I guess the order, I think, is kind of weird. The board looks like this. This is what the board looks like. So if you navigate to the board, this is what it might look like, where you have the issues that have been added to the sprint, and you can see, you can hover and see who's. You can look at the epic. You can see who's it assigned to. You can put an avatar there so you can see who that is. Just the title, the priority, and just a enumeration scheme on what the number is, and then you can and then each developer is responsible for grabbing that sticky note, right, and moving it over, right, to the specific status that it's in, either in progress or done and whatnot. If you click on the issue, you have a right-hand side pops up from the right that lets you see a very quick description of that particular story, which you can scroll up and down. You can assign it to yourself or find someone to assign it to right here and there. You also have a menu here that allows you to edit it in a separate window or remove it. I don't know if you have that capability of removing an issue. Sometimes we remove that privilege of removing it. Once it's created, you cannot remove it. And you can also change, the epic and whatnot here. And as you move it, right, you drag it over to spread to in progress, or when you're done, you drag it over to done, or from within the issue. From within the issue, you can edit it as well. The status. So let me go back. Epics. So epics, as I mentioned earlier, allow you to create large stories, user stories that will have a high-level narrative description of that capture all the goals from the point of view of the user, but something that we know that it's too big, right, to implement, that we want to break it out into smaller stories. And then once you create the epic, you can then every time you create a brand new issue, right, from the create button, you can then associate that new user story to that epic. Right, whether it's a system, administering services, administering users, administering service categories, so that you can then filter. You can filter what are the stories in the epic. So, for instance, in the, back in the backlog, for instance, any epic that you create, it lists all the epics. Right, there's a button, there's a link here called epics, and if you click on it, it expands and it shows all the stories that are within that epic, right? So it shows you all the epics and it tells you how many issues it has, how many have you completed so far, how many, what are the story points that are estimated. So you can create epics in two ways. You can create it from the create button at the top, or also from the backlog. When you expand the epics view here, you have create epic, and you can then create the epic from here. From two different places, you can create it. And then you can filter. Now, once you've created a story, you can look at the backlog and say, if different teams are working in different epics, you can say, okay, well, team 1, and you can show all the issues for team 1. Team 2, let me show you all the backlogs for team 2, or particular epic, right? And you can select and filter, and it shows you how many issues there are, and the backlog changes and shows the different epic stories within that epic. Issues, you can create issues by clicking on the create button, or once you've created it, you can on the right hand side, if you click on the issue, it pops up and you can edit it from here. On the right hand side, it has a drop down. You can click on edit and it pops out a dialog that allows you to enter more details, such as this is a admin searches for service, as an administrator. So this is a user story, right? I think you're asked to create at least 3 of these in the assignment. As an administrator, I want to be able to search for a service so that I can edit it, right? And you would add the developer would be responsible for for describing this a little more further, right? And giving it a size. If you click on the link, of the story of the issue, it pops up. It takes up the entire window, right? So you can see the story a little better, and from here, here's where you can change the status of the story which you typically would use the SCRUM board. Instead of dragging it around, you can do it from within the ticket itself. You can assign it to yourself or assign it to someone else, or you can edit and pop up a dialog that allows you to edit it. You can drag and drop all sorts of images and documents to it. And comments, this is going to be your main mechanism of interacting with other folks. That might be adding comments to the ticket, when you're asking questions from the subject matter expert. You might be asking questions on explaining how to build it, or what kind of explaining a particular functional requirement, and it would stay here as a history of all those conversations. Okay. Let's see what else. Within the issue, you can assign it to yourself. You can assign also the epic that it belongs to. You can also assign it to the sprint that's going to be where you can either drag it in the backlog onto a particular sprint, or you can assign it right from within the issue. So sprints. I believe I believe folks were telling me that they can indeed create sprints. Right? Please verify that indeed you can create sprints. So from the backlog, you'll have, I don't know, like a dozen or so stories for this first assignment. Yes? And once you have those stories identified, you can create a sprint and start dragging these issues onto the sprint. The Scrum Master would do this. Right? We create the sprint. You drag all the issues onto the sprint. That's called loading the sprint. And then you can start the sprint. Right? The Start Sprint button would become highlighted, and then you can click on it, and the clock starts ticking. It'll ask you if you want. Is this a 7-day sprint, or is it a 2-week sprint? How much is it? You can start the sprint, and the clock starts ticking. And then you can assign it, right? And you can move it from one bucket to the next. Okay? Any questions? All right. Yes.
This week, like starting today, that's the start of our first sprint, right?
Right.
So what are we really expected? So is all that we're expected to accomplish in this sprint in the assignment document, or is there more?
No, it's in the assignment document. So it asks. I believe it's every developer will have at least 3 stories: a design story, a research story, and a user story, right? So as a team, you'll write up all 9 or 12 stories together, maybe just a title, and together you'll come up with how long do you think you're going to take you to do. I would imagine it'll be 1 or 2 point each one of them. I imagine, and you'll load up the sprint and you'll assign them to everyone, and then each one individual will go off and add more meat to the issue, more information about what they think they're going to be doing for that particular ticket. And then it asks you to do some commenting, and the research story is very well explained, which is the JPA research story. Learn how to do JPA, right? All the other ones are somewhat, will be fairly vague, right, on describing them. That might not even be ready for implementation this particular sprint. So you leave it in the backlog, right? That you'll come back to it later. So the only real thing that you're going to be implementing this week is really the research story of the JPA, right? Everything else will stay in the backlog, right? Okay. Anything else?